What's happening today, folks? This is the Uncolored Podcast. My name is Kevin Metcalf. I'm your host. Thanks for tuning in. You can get the podcast now on iTunes, Google Play, and the Podbean. That's right, Podbeans. Who dropped the ball and let me in? That's a question they're going to be asking pretty soon. Do me a favor, subscribe and rate the podcast. I would appreciate that very much if you do that. Thank you. In advance, I'm thanking you. That's what I'm doing. Today, I'm going to get into a topic that's just way out of my depth. But I'm going to tackle it anyway, or at least make the attempt. That's science and evolution. And in the Uncolored Sports section, it's not a newspaper. In the Uncolored Sports segment of the podcast, I fixed the NFL. I figured it out. Apparently they got a problem with the replay system. They got the three blind mice there down in New Orleans. The Saints apparently took the bone over the weekend. And I have a solution that fixes the replay system in the NFL for all time. And in a year from now, when you see it implemented a year from now, you're going to look back, the one person who's listening, they go, hey, I remember a guy who said that. I don't know where it was, but that was his rule. He came up with that thing. That's right. It's going to be me. And I'm not even going to take credit for it. Just the fact that the one guy knows, that'll be enough for me. I'll be happy with that. But first, let's get into the ugly part, the science part of the podcast. The reason I think it's important, and the whole idea of this podcast is, it seems to me that a lot of the conversations and the topics that are going around today, I think people are under the impression that they're having objective discussions about things that are going on. That they're objectively looking at data and having discussions about that data. In my opinion, what it seems is people are simply having religious discussions. People have their religious belief and they're pushing it on other people. And if you don't believe their religious belief, you're an idiot and you're dumb. Which is why, I don't know if they say it anymore, but when I was growing up, they used to say, growing up, I don't know. I mean, I've heard it, not recently, because I don't think it's true anymore. But they used to say, you don't have in I don't know if it's mixed company, polite company, I don't know. But they say you don't talk about politics or religion, in mixed company at a party and stuff like that, right? Because it always goes nuts. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why it's, religion and politics, right? It's not sports. Everybody loves to talk about sports and everybody disagrees on sports. But you talk about that in public because everybody realizes, well, it's just me and my team. I'm a fan, right? It's not an objective thing. It's just I like my team and I'm telling you why your quarterback stinks and my team's going to. Sports discussions are great in mixed company. But why are political and religious discussions not great? You know why? They're the same thing. When you're talking about politics, you're talking about religion. Just oftentimes you've extracted, some sort of transcendent being from the conversation, but it essentially is the same conversation. Religion, politics, and oftentimes science, society. I think so many things are the same discussion as a religious discussion. And I need to define what I mean by religion so it might make a little bit more sense. What I'm talking about when I'm talking about religions is more than just the accepted religions that we all know, Mormonism, Judaism, Christianity, whatever you have. I think that it goes far beyond that. I think those religions are easy to spot. I think the other religious beliefs are much harder to spot, or at least they masquerade as something other than a religion. And the way I come to this decision is the same way you would see that people are playing basketball. When you're watching a game on the NBA game on TV, they're playing basketball. But if you go out to your neighborhood park, you'll also see folks playing basketball. Same thing. It looks much different. maybe it looks really different. Maybe it looks really great on one venue and the other place over at the schoolyard. It may look pretty bad or it may look pretty good. But my point is that what makes it playing basketball is the attempt to get the ball through the hole. You can do it at the park. You can do it in an NBA game. You can do it in your backyard. It's all basketball. And I think the same thing applies with religion. Just because people aren't, dressed up on Sunday, walking into a building, opening up some book, listening to somebody up front tell them what the hell's going on in life. Yeah, that's religion. But I think it also takes place in places outside of that environment. I think people who sit in front of a TV all day watching a particular news program and believing everything that the news person tells them, that's church for those folks. It's the same thing. You're sitting in front of somebody and you're believing that what they're telling you about life is actually what is going on in life. And people will believe it because they read it on a piece of paper, right? Or on their tablet, or they saw it with somebody telling them this is what's going on from a newscast. And automatically it's the truth. And how many times have you talked to somebody and they go, well, how do you know? Well, I read in the Washington whatever, in the Regal Times. I saw it in the Daily Bugle. So it's true because I read it in the paper. It's got to be true. It's no different from sitting in a pew in a church, and because somebody from the front told you something is true, you walk out of church believing it's true. It's the exact same thing, in my opinion. It's another religious practice, especially when you're leaving the understanding of reality for somebody else to tell you what it is. And you just simply accept it because the person that you like said that that's the way the world is. And so you just go with that. And now you're yammering to other people, telling them the exact same thing. That's 100% religion, in my opinion. And I think what makes this way of consuming data particularly pernicious is that, there's no attempt to scrutinize or check or challenge the information you're getting. You just take it in and it sounds like what I want to be true, and therefore it's true. You don't look at any other resources, look and see what other people are thinking about it, some other forms of data, some other sources of data, so that you can at least see if what you're hearing is true. That's what makes it, in my opinion, the religious part of it. It's that thing that the only thing that can be true are those things that support what I believe. And I think everybody is susceptible to that kind of failure, and I include myself. You have to always be on guard to make sure that the information that you're taking in passes muster, that it stands up to challenges from other different areas, and sometimes it just doesn't. And you have to go, well, I'm not really sure about that because I don't quite have it locked in. But to take these dogmatic positions on issues where all of the information isn't in or can be interpreted different ways, in my opinion, it's just religion. It's a religious mindset. And that's really what this podcast is about, is to look at that wherever it is. And today I wanted to look at it in the scientific world because I think it's the same thing going on there. And this deals with evolution. So, on to evolution. Now, when people talk about evolution, it's very important to be specific because there are many different meanings when people talk about evolution. There's, and I think that's a characteristic of this religious body of this sort of religious thinking. And it's that a lot of terms when you're in these religious conversations are very ambiguous. They lack specificity. You really have to nail down what things mean. It's like when somebody says, hey, do you believe in climate change? All right, well, what the hell are you talking about? The climate does change. How do you not believe it? You go in your closet, you've got clothes for warm weather and clothes for cold weather. So how do you get to the question, do you believe in climate change? We know that it does. Right? Be specific. What are you talking about? And I think it's the same thing with evolution. When somebody says, hey, do you believe in evolution? Well, what are you talking about? What kind of evolution? And there's a lot of different meanings when they're talking about evolution. So I'm just going to go over a few of them because I'm not smart enough to understand all of them. And all of them are not pertinent to what we're talking about. So I want to just hammer in on the ones that we're talking about. Now, this was from a presentation by a guy named Jonathan Wells. He is an intelligent design theorist. And it's his book. He has a book called Icons of Evolution. Icons of Evolution. And what he does is he illustrates some of the icons of evolution that he believes are false, and then he gives the evidence, or at least his data, as to why these icons are false. And I'm not going to go through it, but I'll put a link to it in the description so you can look at the video that I saw. But one of the things he points out is that even today, and he was talking about even in his college career, there are all these biology textbooks that are in schools, college textbooks, PhD level textbooks that have these odd statements that are that seem misleading, or at least we'll just say they're doing too much. They're trying a little bit too hard. They go beyond, in my opinion, what you would think just a scientific statement would be. So here's one from a biology book called Evolutionary Biology by Douglas J. Futuyma, Futuyma, 3rd edition, 1998. And here's what he says. Descent with modification from common ancestors is a scientific fact. That is a hypothesis so well supported by the evidence that we take it to be true. Now, for me, a couple of problems with this. First of all, who's we? Right? I mean, does he mean all scientists? Is he talking about just the group who wrote the book? Who's we? It's very ambiguous. And again, ambiguity, when people start making ambiguous statements, there's a hint that they're making religious statements. Not all the time. But when they're making these declarative statements and they put in things like we, well, who the hell are you talking about? All scientists, most scientists, 97%. Well, like the 97% thing. Who are you talking about? We. You could put many scientists. That's good. But we, I think, is doing too much. Also, it's a scientific fact. And he says that is a hypothesis so well supported by the evidence. We take it to be true. Again, to me, that's doing too much. You could just say descent with modification, is the idea that ancestors come from a common ancestor. And that's enough. You don't have to put all the statements about we think it's a fact and it's so well done. What are you doing? You're not in court. You're not in court. You're just teaching a textbook, put out the statement, and then let people investigate. And when I see those kinds of things that are supposed to be objective statements, to me it seems like they're trying to promote an ideology. Here's another one. This is from Life on Earth by Odskirk, and Byers. This is the 2nd edition, 2000, the year 2000. What they say is the theory of evolution states that modern organisms descended with modification from pre-existing life forms. And here's the craziness. Virtually all biologists consider evolution to be a fact. So what? So what? There's this thing in science where if enough people believe it, that makes it true. And I don't get that. That doesn't seem scientific, where facts are determined by polling data. Why do you put that in there? Why can't you just say the theory of evolution states that modern organisms descended with modification from pre-existing life forms? That is what it is. That's a factual statement. And you could even add, many biologists consider this to be a fact. But why not also add in there, not all there are some challenges to the theory. What's wrong with that? And there are some valid challenges to the theory. Why would you not put that in there? Because it's a cherry picking of data. It's a cherry picking of information to promote one ideology. And it doesn't seem to me that that's necessary or even appropriate in what should be an objective study of data. Just put the theory out there. This is what it is. Let's move on to the next thing. Right? But it goes on. Why is it, and when it talks about, they consider it to be a fact, they continue. Why? Because an overwhelming body of evidence permits No other conclusion. Really? So then you would think that, and I would wonder when you would talk to some of the other, Nobel Prize winning scientists who go, well, actually, that's not true. What would they say to that? And again, the question is, why do you need to put in there that there's no other conclusion that can that could be drawn when you have so many, decorated, prominent scientists who have other conclusions? I don't think that's necessary. And so for me, this is indicative of not an objective scientific statement, but a religious statement trying to use science to support their particular view of the facts. And I think it's unnecessary. And the reason I think it's unnecessary is you don't do these things that are really facts. Nobody walks around and goes, the world is round, and almost everybody believes it. You don't do that. If somebody walked up to you, and there are people around, if I understand correctly, who think the world's flat. There are flat earthers around. And I don't know why anybody would waste any time with them. You show a picture, a satellite picture, I don't know, Google Earth on your phone, and show them that the world is round. I wouldn't even do that. Listen, if somebody said the world is flat, I got to figure, A, they're looking for attention, or B, they're just not that smart. And I don't know why I would spend any time with either one of those folks. Not that they're even bad folks, but I don't have time for that. I wouldn't write a book or make a statement or put out a speech that's saying everybody believes it and there's no other conclusion. If somebody believes it, God bless them. If you don't want to believe the world's round, okay, whatever. There's an insecurity, in my opinion, in these kinds of statements that try to convince you with fists clenched that you can't believe anything than what we've just told you. It's not necessary, and it shows the insecurity, in my opinion. So what I want to do is next time we do this has gone on way too long. I don't know, maybe it hasn't gone too long, but it could turn into a snore fest really quick. But I will give you just a couple of the issues that are, how should I say, that challenge the theory of evolution. One of them is by a guy named Michael Behe. And Michael Behe is a scientist who came up with this idea of irreducible complexity. And the idea of irreducible complexity, if I don't screw it up, which there's every reason to believe that I will, it basically says that there are some organisms within the cell, microorganisms, that are so complex that they cannot have evolved. So the idea is that the theory of evolution says that these random mutations occur, and then something better is made, and that better thing, it's like a game show, gets to move on to the next round. And if you don't, make it, then you're left out and you become extinct. And this continues on and continues on to more and more complex organisms. I think, if I got that right. Well, what Michael Behe said, and he pointed to this thing called what is it? It's not the phalange, or it's a flagellum. That's what it is. Boy, I am so way out of my depth. There's this thing called a flagellum that's on the cell wall, I believe. And apparently it's it has like 30 different proteins that make it up. And what Michael Behe says is that all 30 of those things have to be there at the same time. In other words, 15 of the parts don't do anything. 18, 20, 25, 29 of the 30 parts necessary. If you only have 29 of them, it's useless. And according to Darwinism, if it's useless, it doesn't get to move on to the next round. So what Michael Behe was saying is that there's this flagellum thing is so complex, and if you don't have all of the parts, then it's useless. Therefore, it could not have evolved. It had to show up all at one time. And the example he uses is a mouse trap. And what he says is, if you take a mouse trap and you remove one of the parts, then it's useless. If you remove the spring or the platform, the hook or whatever it is, if you remove any one of those parts of a mouse trap, doesn't work anymore. It's useless. And that's the example he uses with the flagellum. It's useless unless it has all 30 parts. Now, that's one of the challenges to the theory of evolution, that there are some organisms that are so complex that they could not have evolved. Okay, that's one of them. The other one, I think, is one of the major challenges, is the problem of information. And when they figured out these nucleotides with the DNA, they've got those letters that connect to each other. So they've got those connecting letters, and it turns out it's a code. And it's like computer code. Even who's the guy, the computer guy, the Bill Gates, right? He says that the computer code is a code more advanced than anything we've ever come up with. And these codes apparently control or guide all of the processes in every cell, right? They say the code is so long that it goes back and forth to the moon 50 million times in your body. I don't know, something like that. But it's this incredibly complex code. And so the question is, where does the code come from? Where does the information come from that directs this process? And I'm not quite sure how that works or what the problem is. But apparently that's a big challenge to the idea of evolution. And I think one of the problems is that if you were to have random mutations, then that doesn't bring more complex organisms. It actually breaks it down. And when they're talking about the code, the example that was used is, if you took your computer, David Berlinski talked about this. He says, if you took your computer, and if you knew anything about the code, and I don't, but apparently if you took the computer code that makes up your computer or one of the software programs, and you just started randomly changing the data in the program, just arbitrarily picking data, pretty soon it wouldn't get better. I mean, you wouldn't get whatever program 2.0 or 3.0. You wouldn't get a better program. What would actually happen is pretty soon it would start to break down. You would start to find errors, and then it would just totally stop working. The more random changes you would put. Another example, Berlinski said, it's like, if you took the book Don Quixote, and over time you had a bunch of blind monks translated who didn't know the original language, and then you'd get the book Shakespeare, right? That doesn't happen with information and data. We don't have examples of randomly changing data and information and making a more complex, better system. And so that's another challenge to the idea of evolution, just randomly making these mutations and getting a better organism. So those two ideas are developed in great detail in a whole lot of different, books, papers, scientists everywhere. There are atheistic scientists who don't believe in God and actually believe in the theory of evolution, who have problems with Darwinian evolution as far as the origin of the species. And so the point I'm trying to make is simply this. The idea that, like this textbook Life on Earth says, that the evidence permits no other conclusion, it's wrong. It's simply untrue. And what I'll do in other podcasts is bring the evidence for him. It'll be wrong for me to sit there and say that it's not true and bring no evidence. I just don't want to prolong this talk any longer than I have to. Listen, I'm interested. I can't guarantee that everybody's interested in hearing all this junk, so I don't want to go too long. I'm simply trying to develop this point. Listen, I'm simply trying to develop the point, and that is that there's objective science, there's objective data, there's the objective scrutiny of that data in the pursuit of truth, and then there's hyperbole, demagoguery, and propaganda in the name of science. And I'm simply saying that we all need to scrutinize and make sure, we all need to be on guard that we're not getting the second kind that's simply trying to establish a religious dogma instead of just objectively looking at data. And I think those two examples in these two biology books, the one by Fukuyama, and Odskirk and Byers, to me, both of those go beyond simply making scientific statements and get into political, religious propaganda. And I think that's unfortunate. And that's really the basis of this whole podcast, is just to illustrate those things. And I think that's just a nice start. All right, that's all. That's enough of that. Thanks for listening. This is Kevin Metcalf. This is the Uncolored Podcast, and I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll be back with Uncolored Sports, where I fix the NFL. I fix all of their problems. No one will ever worry about a bad call again in the NFL after you hear my little solution here in the Uncolored Sports segment. So thanks for listening. This is Kevin Metcalf, and this is the Uncolored Podcast. Hey, I just wanted to drop something on St. Jude's Hospital. They do some great things for families who are going through some incredibly horrific circumstances. And I know there's a lot of organizations who are also doing great things, and all of them are asking for your time and resources. But I just wanted to put St. Jude's Hospital on that list if you're considering someplace you can help. And this is not a paid thing. They don't even know I exist, other than the donations that I give on a monthly basis. This might even be illegal, what I'm doing. I don't know. But I just wanted to maybe put that in your mind. If you're looking for a place where you can help out, I think St. Jude's is a very worthwhile organization, and they would love to have your help. So, all right, that's enough of that. Get out of here. And we're back. This is Kevin Metcalf. This is the Uncolored Podcast. And this is the Uncolored Sports section of the podcast, where I talk about sports-related issues. A couple of things where I promised that I was going to solve, finally, the replay rule in the NFL for everybody. That's been a problem since the beginning of the NFL. Well, since replay, not since the beginning. And I've got a solution that's going to end it for all time. I'm going to get to that. But first, what I wanted to get to was, I think I've learned the secret to Tom Brady's success. Tom Brady is the greatest football player of all time. I'm a big Tom Brady fan. Have been since he started playing. I was a Raiders fan until the Tuck rule thing happened. And then Al Davis started getting all loopy and crazy with the team. So I jumped off that bandwagon. And then I became a player. I like certain players. I love Joe Montana. Stopped following the Niners when they got rid of Montana. And then I glommed on to Tom Brady because I think that there are certain players in the league who do it the right way. And I root for those players. And ever since I saw this, there's a sports documentary called The Brady Six. And it's one of the most compelling sports documentaries I've ever seen. And you really get the picture of why Brady is who he is, how great he is. Because listen, every time he steps on the field, he's the least athletic person on the field every single time. Doesn't have the greatest arm, doesn't have the greatest skills, yet he is the best football player of all time, in my opinion. I think he's probably the greatest athlete. I think he put up there with Muhammad Ali, Michael Jordan, the greatest athlete of all time. Specifically because, when you look at Jordan, when you look at Ali, they had incredible physical skills to go along with their incredible their championship heart, their single-mindedness of purpose. They also had great athletic ability to go along with it. Tom Brady's got none of that. If you were to watch that Brady Six documentary, they show him in the combine, and I got to tell you. He was pissed that he got passed over, but boy, I'll tell you, when you see him in the combine, you go, he was this long, tall, gangly, uncoordinated guy. But he clearly had athletic skill because he was recruited, I think, for baseball and football. So clearly he had he had ability, but athletically, the guy's got he's the least skilled person. But there's something more to Tom Brady that makes him the best. And that's, in my opinion, what makes him the greatest. I think possibly the greatest athlete of all time. But when you look at the documentary, you can see that he's got this monster that, and we all have this monster. It's a monster that lives inside of us that we view the world through. And sometimes it's a good monster, sometimes it's a bad one. And I think for Brady's monster was a good one. And what the talk you hear this week from a lot of, sports TV shows, if you watch like I do, like First Things First on Fox Sports, Chris and Nick Wright. Nick Wright was saying, how can the Patriots use this underdog thing, when they've had so much success? They're not the underdogs. They're actually favored this week. Some people favor them. But it's not about whether or not they're favored. Any person who is a competitor, or anytime anybody enters any arena of competition, it doesn't have to be athletics. It could be business, it could be academics, whatever it is. Going into it that oftentimes you're going to be the underdog. The odds are going to be stacked against you. There's going to be people who are better than you, who have done it before. They've got more skills than you, whatever it is. But that's never a problem for you if you're a competitor. You know that going in. It's not the underdog thing that gives you that edge, that makes you burn, that makes you work harder, that makes you force your way through the obstacles. It's the idea that there are people out there that don't think you can do it. And that's a totally different thing from being the underdog. Because I said, everybody's an underdog at one point or time. Everybody's an underdog at one time or other. That's just life. Can't get around that. But the idea that there are people out there that don't think you can do it, that's what makes a competitor burn. That's what makes them put in the extra hours of study, the extra hours of physical workout. And that's what I believe, that's Brady's monster. I think Brady's got this monster that over time has been built into this unstoppable thing that's always telling them, they don't think you can do it. Look at them. They think you're too old, too slow, too whatever. And I think that monster's been poking him in the back his whole career. And when you think about it, it seems obvious. He got benched when he was a quarterback at Michigan. He was a senior. And this guy, Drew Henson, comes in, who was a baseball player. They put Drew Henson in, and the coach, I can't remember who it was. And I remember it pissed me off at the time. Not because it was Tom Brady, but I just hate these coaches that will, they don't give a player a chance to fail. Or if they fail, they jerk them out and put somebody else in. Because I think when you're a developing player, you need to be able to go in and feel like, listen, if I make a mistake, if I don't have, my best game, the coach isn't going to rip me and put me on the bench. I could make up. He has confidence in me that I'm going to overcome some of the errors that I made. And when you got a coach that if you make a mistake, they pull you out and put somebody else in, you can never get that confidence. That's what I think. That's why I think Don Nelson, who everybody thought was, one of the greatest coaches ever, I thought he was a terrible coach when he was with the Warriors. He would mix players in and out all the time. A player would miss a couple of shots, he'd put him on the bench and put somebody else in. He thought he was this big chess master, it seemed like he thought. And no player could ever get a rhythm going. Because I think in the back of their heads they're going, listen, if I don't play exactly right, if I miss a shot, if I do something wrong, he's going to put me on the bench, and that puts extra pressure. So when Brady was getting benched for Drew Henson, that bugged me back in Michigan. But imagine you're a senior and some sophomore comes in and you get benched from the sophomore. That's the monster saying, hey, coach doesn't think you're good enough. Right? Then you go to the NFL draft and 6 other players get picked before you. And in your mind, you're thinking, I'm at least as good as those folks. And they all got picked before you. And the monster says, see, they don't think you're good enough. And you can hear it in Brady's voice. You can hear it in the documentary. That's what's brought up. Look, why do you think the Garoppolo thing was such a big deal? I think it was the same thing. Here you got a quarterback coming in, starting his career, Jimmy Garoppolo, who I don't think is that good. I'm sorry, 49ers. I think you may have picked the wrong guy. Thankfully, you've got Shanahan there, who's going to probably get the best out of him. But I don't think he's as great as everybody else says he is. Sorry about that. But when he goes to New England, Brady's like, get this guy out of here. Because the monster was telling him that, hey, they brought that guy in to replace you. They don't think you're good enough. And that's the message that he hears all the time. Every time he goes out there, he's there to prove that he belongs in the NFL, that he belongs as a starting quarterback of the New England Patriots. You know, he told Robert Kraft that the day he's drafted, he's like, I think the fourth quarterback drafted. I mean, the fourth quarterback on the team, which teams never have a fourth quarterback. Then he goes up to Robert Kraft, some guy that, you know, Kraft's never seen this gangly kid coming up to him. And Tom's like, hey, draft day, that was your lucky day when you picked me. It's not exactly what he said, but words to that effect. Tom Brady's like, I'm your guy. Brady always believed that he could. And the fact that there were so many people that were saying that he couldn't do it, I think that's the secret to his success. That every time he goes out there, he's proven that. When he's watching film, he wants to prove that. And the monster has become his thing. And it's not that I don't think that's that far-fetched. You know, I think it's the same. Listen, when there are people who think that every time something, you know, happens to them, it's discrimination. Discrimination is their monster. It's not an objective thing. It's not the statistics that say that Tom Brady is the most successful quarterback of all time. That's not what you're looking at. The monster doesn't see things objectively. The monster only likes things that taste good to it. It only likes the data that it likes. It's like me with steak. You know, people are like, you know, you should eat tofu. Tofu's better for you. You know, like, I'm sure it is. I'm going to eat steak. It's going to kill you. That red meat's going to kill you. Yeah, you know, probably right. But, you know, if you're going to die from something, it might as well be something you enjoy. That's my feeling. I'd rather be dead and going, boy, that was one hell of a porterhouse. Then, you know, well, I lived a couple extra years, but it was all kale and tofu. Now that I think back on it, I should have had the ribeye. Yeah, I got a couple of extra more years of life on kale, but yeah, should have had the steak. It's not an objective thing. I'm sure kale and tofu is better for you. I like steak. That's my monster, or at least one of them. I think there are people who think that if they don't get something, it's because they're black. You know, 5 black coaches were fired this year in the NFL. And rather than them going, well, they had a terrible winning percentage among them. If you aggregate them all, it was like under 500. But it's not because they didn't win enough games. It's because they're black. And there's no amount of objective data that could make a person whose monster is racism and discrimination. There's just no objective data that can make them see anything differently. There's some women out there who think that whatever they don't get, it's because they're a woman. The pay gap? Oh, that's because I'm a woman. And women are but there's books and data and all these things that say that there actually is no wage gap. That is explained away by choices and decisions that people make individually. Doesn't matter. The monster doesn't want to hear anything that it doesn't like to eat. It only wants to eat what it likes. And if it likes to hear that women are discriminated against, if it likes to hear that you don't get things because of racism, that's all it will listen to. Even if later on you find out that what you were looking at or the thing that it wasn't true, may have had nothing to do with racism. It's too late. Monster's already eaten it up. It's got its stomach all full, loosening its belt, licking his lips, picking his teeth. He's already eaten the data that he wants, and he's grown bigger. And people are ruled by these monsters. And that's what I think the success that Tom Brady has had, it's because of that monster that says people don't think you're good enough. So let me get to this horrid thing that happened to the New Orleans Saints over the weekend. Now, a lot of people are saying that they shouldn't be thinking about it. It's not that big of a deal. There were other calls that were missed, and all of that's true. Okay, but nothing was like this. Anybody who's telling you that This is just a distraction from maybe the first down call that Sean Payton made that they shouldn't have made. And if he didn't make that call, they would. They're right. They're right. If Sean Payton didn't make that pass play on first down, yeah, they probably would have won the game. But that's not what it's about. The call that the referees chose not to make was obvious and egregious. Right? Look at it this way. You know, when somebody calls in and says, hey, somebody stole my car, right? Typically what'll happen is they'll say, what happened? If you gave the keys to your car to somebody and they didn't turn it in, and oftentimes that's what it is. Hey, I lent somebody my car and they haven't returned it. Well, that's not a stolen vehicle. It's bad. You still don't have your car. But typically that's not a criminal complaint. That's a civil complaint. The cops aren't going to go out there and chase somebody down who you let them have the car and they're just not returning it when you thought they should have. Again, it's still bad, but it's not a criminal offense, typically. But if somebody came up with a gun and said, hey, you get out of your car, I'm taking it, get the hell out of there. Okay, police need to go to that. The police shouldn't go, well, I mean, maybe he really knew that. No, that's a serious crime that just occurred. It's not the same thing. Your car is still missing, but it's not the same thing, not even a little bit. And it's the same thing with that call. It was egregious, that pass interference call. It was horribly egregious. And to try and compare it to other calls that were missed during the game is misleading. It's disingenuous. And the reason they're trying to downplay it is because they don't want the league to make a whole bunch of changes with the replay rule. That's really what it's all about. They're trying to downplay the egregiousness of that call because they don't want new rule changes. Thankfully, I figured it out for them so they don't have to worry about it. Okay, here's what you do. So now the way it is in any football game, the coach has two challenges. Now, there are certain things he can't challenge, but 2 times during the game, he can use a timeout and challenge the call. And if the challenge goes his way, he gets the timeout back. If the challenge doesn't go his way, then he loses the timeout. That's the current replay challenge system. Now, here's the change they should make. First of all, you give the coach one challenge. Just in the playoffs, not the regular season. You keep it the same. But in the playoffs, when it's one and done, you just give the coach one challenge. But here's the thing. It's a super challenge, meaning they can challenge any call on the field. Doesn't matter if the ref blew the whistle. Doesn't matter. Right? Doesn't matter if the fumble, they couldn't, the play was over. It doesn't matter. Right? If the ref's pants are not the right size, you think you can throw a flag on whatever the hell you want to throw a flag on, but you just get one. That way, not only will there be less calls made, because the coach knows he's only got one, and it may have been a bad call in the second quarter, but he's got 2 more quarters to go. And if something bad happens at the end of the game, that's what they're going to save it for. And it still may not go his way. But if he had that one challenge, if the Saints had that one challenge, that super challenge, they could have had that call reversed. And here's why the call is such a bad call. Or should I say, this is why the NFL should implement this rule. Referees are as good as they will ever be. There's no other system you can put in that will eliminate the possibility that the refs goof up. They're human beings. The New York system where they have people in New York, they screw it up too. So you can't fix it. But what happens is when you have a penalty that is this egregious, you overshadow what was an amazing game. Nobody's talking about what happened in the game. Everybody's talking about this horrific penalty that occurred. And that's not good for the NFL. It's not good for any event where you have this incredible event and then something horrible happens, something that should not have happened happens, and that's all everybody's talking about. Okay, that's not what the NFL wants. And this system could eliminate that because look what happens. Let's say the ref makes a bad call. The coach challenges it with a super challenge. And turns out that the coach was wrong. Okay, now whatever happens, it's on the coach. You see, you put the onus back on the football team, and you take the onus off of the referees where it should not be. Nobody wants the referee determining the outcome of a game, and that's what happened to the New York Saints, to the New Orleans Saints. The referees determined the end of that game. That's why it was so egregious. That's why that horrible call overshadowed what was a great game that nobody's even talking about anymore. But if it's the coach who, hey, let's say he threw his challenge flag in the second quarter on an offsides call, or maybe the ball was spotted wrong, and he went, okay, that's fine. So when that penalty happens later on in the game and he doesn't have a flag to throw, that's on the coach. It takes it off of the referee because we expect the referees to make bad calls. But now it's on the coach because he had the opportunity or the means to fix that, but he chose the wrong time to use it. That's why that first down pass is not a big deal. People are pointing to that as what lost them the game. Look, you expect the coach to make bad calls sometimes. That's part of the game. Players make bad passes, coaches make bad calls, runners fumble the ball. All of those things happen within the game, and everybody is okay with it. What we're not okay with is the three blind mice in striped uniforms choosing not to throw the flag on an obvious play. Nobody is okay with that. And with the super challenge, you fix it all. No matter what happens, when one of those calls happens, the coach has the ability to get it fixed because he can challenge anything that happens on the field. So, I know it's a perfect solution. I know people are going to congratulate me. I'd expect calls from the NFL. They're going to fly me down to wherever and help them work with the team to get this implemented. So I may not be available for a while because I'll be working with the NFL to get the rule implemented. But yeah, I know. It's genius. It's genius. You don't have to tell me. You don't have to write me. You can tell me how genius the idea is, because it is. But that would fix it. So that's it. That's it for me today. Thanks for listening to the Uncolored Podcast. You can get the podcast on the iTunes, Google Podcasts, and the Podbean. You can email me if you'd like at uncoloredmedia@gmail.com. That's uncoloredmedia@gmail.com. You can check out the website at uncoloredmedia.com. What did I just say? The email is uncoloredmedia@gmail.com. The website is just uncoloredmedia.com. I'm still working on it, getting it fixed up, so there may not be a whole lot of stuff there, but you can get the podcast there also. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments, any challenges, any questions, anything that I did wrong, feel free to get a hold of me and let me know. Thanks for listening again. This is Kevin Metcalf, and this is the Uncolored Podcast.